The Lodge at the Horn Tavern. We all know that in 1716 a meeting was held at the Apple Tree Tavern in Covent Garden, London, to discuss a revival of an annual assembly. The four lodges were lodges that met at the Goose and Gridiron Ale House at St Paul's Churchyard that had been established 25 years earlier in 1691. The Crown Ale House from near Drury Lane, established only 4 years earlier, and the lodge at the Apple Tree Tavern in Covent Garden, also established in 1712, and the Rummer and Grapes Tavern from Westminster from around the same time. At that meeting, it was decided to establish a Grand Lodge in London. The Rummer and Grapes Lodge was in Westminster, near the Houses of Parliament, and later it moved to the Horn Tavern, so it's changed its name. The other three lodges were operative lodges in the City of London. They had probably been set up after the Fire of London to help when hundreds of Masons came from the countryside to London to help rebuild London, and particularly St Paul's Cathedral. With the advent of the Duke of Montagu to the Grand Master's seat in the East in 1721, Freemasonry rose to fame and success in one bound. In 1723, there were a total of 20 lodges listed in the constitutions, including the original 4. By 1730, there were 104 lodges, and by 1739, there were 186 lodges, though many that were established in haste disappeared just as quickly. Membership of the first 3 operative lodges in 1725 was about 15 brethren each, while the Rummer and Grapes had a roll of 70 members, and the leading men of Speculative Freemasonry were members in the early days, including George Payne, James Anderson, and John de Sagulier, as well as a large number of influential noblemen who Robert Gould lists the membership of the lodge that met at the time in 1725, and the following 13 names are listed in the same order as he gives. The first he listed was Lord Paisley. He had estates both in Scotland and Ireland, becoming the 7th Earl of Abercorn and a member of the Royal Society. The same year that this list was drawn up, he was serving as the 9th Grand Master of the Premier Grand Lodge. The third Duke of Queensbury was a gentleman of the bedchamber to King George I. This was an important position of trust. The Duke was a man of considerable influence, particularly in Scotland, where at the time of his membership he was Vice Admiral of Scotland, later to become the Keeper of the Great Seal of Scotland, Lord Justice General, and Senior Privy Councillor. The Queensbury rules of boxing were established later by his great-great-great-grandson, several times removed. The royal physicians, Richard Manningham, was also a member of the Horn Lodge. He had joined the Royal Society in 1720. Lord Waldegrave, the first Earl of Waldegrave, and was related to King James II through his mother, who was James's illegitimate daughter. Count La Lippe was Rudolf Ferdinand, Lord of Lippe-Biesterfeld, a German noble. Then there was Baronet Sir Adolphus Orton, who had been an officer in the Foot Guards and later the Coldstream Guards, serving under the Duke of Marlborough at the Battle of Blenheim. He was a member of Parliament and also groom of the bedchamber to the Prince of Wales, later to become King George II. The Earl de Lorraine, later to become the Duke of Lorraine, who 20 years later still became King Francis I of Germany and the Holy Roman Emperor. Though at the time of his membership of the Horn, he was a minor German noble. Sir Robert Rich, a colonel in the Dragoon Guards and a former member of Parliament. The king asked Rich to raise a regiment to combat the Jacobite rising of 1715, known as Lord Mar's Revolt. 30 years later, he was made a field marshal. Count Christian Heinrich von Watzdorf was a member of domestic affairs in Dresden, Germany. Next, the Marquis de Mache. He was later to petition the Grand Master, Lord Raymond, for a warrant to open lodges in Savoy and Piedmont. Sir Thomas Prendergast was a barrister. He seems that he used his family connections to find a position in government through the help of his first cousin, the Duchess of Richmond. Her husband was Charles Lennox, Earl of March, who became a Member of Parliament and a Fellow of the Royal Society. Lennox would have been a powerful patron for his cousin, Thomas Prendergast, who had probably joined the Horn, having been introduced to Freemasonry by Lennox, who was a past Grand Master. The last name on this list of 13 members was Lord Carmichael. He was a Scottish noble and at the time of the meeting was known as Viscount Inglis Berry. Later he was to become the third Earl of Hindford and Lord of the Bedchamber to King George III. Difficulty in researching the names of this period is due not just because spelling was not standardized, but because many nobles had several inherited titles, and during their lifetimes they would be known by their different titles. However, we can learn much from this list about the aspirations of Freemasonry at the Horn around 1725. Firstly, not only are there several nobles among the brethren, but many are distinguished Europeans and even Catholics, though I believe that the inclusion of the Duke of Lorraine was an embellishment at a later date. Besides this, many names on this list are also in other organizations, such as the Royal Society. 3 of the 13 members are in the Royal Society, and 5 of the 13 members served in one of the king's bedchambers. It is worth noting that many members of the nobility served and still serve nowadays in elite forces as officers. For example, His Royal Highness Prince Henry of Wales, who was a captain in the Blues and Royals for 10 years from 2005. However, he is not a Freemason. It seems to me that the officers of the Horn had targeted influential members of society to swell its rank and provide potential future noble Grand Masters, which would assure the success of Freemasonry. Another important point is that there were English, Scots and Irish sitting together in lodge, as well as Huguenots, who are Protestants, and Catholics. This would probably never have happened in polite London society. Anderson noted in his constitutions of 1723, saying, after the rebellion was over, AD 1716, and though history tells us that the Jacobites were defeated by government forces at the Battle of Preston in November 1715, there was one last-ditch attempt by the Old Pretender, who surrendered to the Duke of Argyll the next year in January 1716. However, the Jacobites tried again in 1719, 3 years after the meeting at the Apple Tree Tavern. This time, they had support from the Spanish government. The British government again defeated these forces quickly at the Battle of Glen Shield, the last battle in Great Britain between British and foreign troops. So despite the dangers of the Jacobites or Catholic nations attempting to capture the English throne, and the Jesuits and the Inquisition and even suspicious citizens, the Premier Grand Lodge continued to grow. Sometime before 1725, the third degree was introduced and Freemasonry became essentially the same as it is now. Thank you.